if we dig a little deeper, we'll see the way that students are grieving, and we can meet that.
Humans have an innate radar for justice.
How do you properly appropriate the scriptures and sexual integrity?
Welcome back to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast. My name's Ashley, and I'm so excited today for us to have a conversation about some of the conversations we've been having behind the scenes about talking to middle schoolers and high schoolers about grief, justice, sex, and Easter, which all sound wild together. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Well, before
I'm
we
sad,
jump
I'm happy, Jesus rose from the dead.
You know, we can pull it together. Content creators here, you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
But before we jump in, I want you to meet who is in the room with me today. So across from me,
Stuart Hall, 34 years in youth ministry, just incredibly excited to be in this circle talking about what we're talking about today. Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Mack, and I just love working with kids and teenagers. I think that's that for that. There you go.
こんにちは、僕の名前は橋口あゆぶです。And just in case, for those that don't speak Japanese, my name is Ayubu, and I'm super excited to be a part of this. 12 years full-time paid ministry, but then had volunteer, part-time, and then also moved out of ministry for a season. Super volunteer, so was that guy that everybody wanted to talk to about volunteering in the ministry. I've got 3 boys. One just started middle school. I'm super stressed about it. So any advice that you can give me, I'm reliving every discussion and conversation I had with all my parents.
own it, just own it.
So living it. And so I love it. I get to be an orange specialist here. And so I'm just excited about partnering with some of y'all that are in my territory.
Amazing.
So excited you're here.
Yeah.
friend. If you follow our suggested scope and cycle, then you might be preparing to teach your spring content. But please don't tune us out, because even if you don't use our XP3 curriculum, I think the content we're going to be talking about is going to be helpful, because you probably talk about things like Easter, sex, justice, grief with your students.
In that order.
Yes, for sure. And so today I just want to kind of pull the curtain back. And I think some of the best, most fruitful and sharpening things for me personally is the conversations that we have behind closed doors. And that's what I love about this podcast, is it's bringing people to the table so we can all have the conversation together. So I'm going to just throw one of these topics on the table, and I'm just curious what some of the conversations have sounded like. So I'm just going to throw grief out there. Just going to go for grief. What's important to remember when talking to middle and high schoolers about grief?
In one of our conversations that the team was having as we launched into creating the curriculum for it was, okay, let's take a step all the way back. When we say grief, what's the thing that comes top of mind? And what are the things that we don't always label as grief readily that are still grief? And so obviously we talked about how death is like, yes, we grieve death, and we're used to using language around grief and death. But then we kind of made a list of probably 10 or 15 other things that's like, oh, the loss of a pet, the loss of, if you have an injury, a career-ending injury. Like, there's just a whole list of things that we're like, we don't always put language around, oh, you're grieving, or that's why you're processing in this way, or that's why you're experiencing life in this way. That's a part of your grieving process. And so giving more language to things that aren't just obvious when it comes to loss. And yeah, so that was part of the conversation.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
We talked about that as well, like just the collective grief we experienced in the last few years. So even for a 12-year-old who maybe has never used the word grief before, or who hasn't lost a pet or a human, like the collective grief of just like unmet expectations, or like things you were looking forward to that got canceled, and like making it so concrete for them that it doesn't have to be as heavy as, you know, divorce or death or, you know, separation or whatever, fill in the blank. It can be something as simple as, I didn't get to go to my 8th grade dance, which I shouldn't even say simple, because it's not simple to a middle schooler. You know, it is a very real grief for them. So I love that you said that.
We were even talking the other day, it's almost as if every teenager, every human does this, but every teenager walks around with a box of expectations, and anytime an expectation isn't met, grief, it's connected to loss and significance. So to both of your points, like, we can't dictate what a kid is grieving because we don't understand the expectation they have attached to it. So not getting invited to an 8th grade dance is just as significant to a teenager as losing a pet or a loved one.
Yeah.
Because it's about significance and loss.
And I think one of the biggest challenges in talking about grief with teenagers is it requires some kind of like vocabulary to be able to have a conversation. And for some of our students, this may be the very first conversation they've ever had. They may not have been to counseling. They may not have a family who talks about that kind of stuff. And so I feel like it feels like an onion. Like there's just layers to this conversation. And everybody's response to grief and how they grieve is so different.
Yep.
And I think our temptation as youth leaders and small group leaders is to like act a certain way about grief when it's like the very like variety of reactions is what grief is.
I don't know how soon we want to talk about this, but one of the things I brought up the other day that we were wrestling with a little bit was I think another thing that comes along with the expectation lost, and it's interesting between middle school and high school, it may differ, is I think a lot of teenagers today are grieving their loss of perspective that they had toward God. Like sometimes we don't realize that when you lose something significant and you have an expectation of God that he doesn't meet, your perspective of God changes, and a lot of times the process between middle school and high school is that older students are grieving God to me used to be concrete and now he's not as concrete anymore. That can happen in middle school, but Ashley, to your point, the things that we've experienced over the last several years, I think there are a lot of teenagers that are grieving. This is the way I used to see God, and I don't see him that way anymore. And it's deeper than just I lost this. It's not only did I lose this, but I don't even see God the same way anymore because in my mind, he didn't come through for me, which opens up in a completely different thing for us as we talk about grief. Sorry, I went a little deeper.
Yeah,
than that.
I love it. It actually made me think of some of our FACE research here at Orange, like the foundational questions that middle and high schoolers are asking in each phase. I think like just one of the questions in middle school, who am I? There is layers of grief in that question. It's, am I the person that my parents expect me to be? Am I the person who's going to be accepted in that group? And it is just saturated with grief, but that conversation hasn't happened yet. It's just, it feels like an exploration. And I just think that that's why we need to be talking about grief. Not just in a standalone. I mean, our heart in this standalone is that it would be a catalyst for a continued conversation. Like, I can't imagine talking about a topic where we shouldn't come across grief of some kind.
I think one other thing that's probably newer-ish to the conversation on grief is the impact of parasocial relationships. Like everyone's experiencing the grief of celebrities in a different way. Like when you hear about someone who's passed, or I'm thinking even like the whole Black Panther movie, the second movie was a masterclass on grief and how a community grieves together. And so I think as you watched both his life on social media and the people who knew him in real life, and then you have all of the people who watched the movies and felt attached to Chadwick as like Black Panther, and then you watch how are they going to handle this in a cinematic way. Like there's so many layers because we see these people in a new way because of social media. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
our
Kobe
access.
or Twitch
Yes.
or like literally you feel something and you want to grieve and you want to participate. You don't want to be surface level and just be posting thoughts and prayers because you feel some sadness. But it's like, what do I do with this now?
But what a brilliant way to teach grief.
Yes.
Is to watch one of those movies or watch. I mean, I know for all humans, honestly, it's easier to talk about somebody else than yourself. It's easier to see it in someone else than to see it in yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I feel like that is such a good principle when talking about something that feels a little murky and unclear. It's watch somebody else walk through it and ask questions about it. Why do you think? And like teach them the curiosity of it and then help them connect it back to themselves. So as you were talking, I was like, oh, let's write more on it.
Yeah, for sure.
So
for
good.
Sure.
I was just sharing with Leslie, I was just reflecting back how how my personal, like I experienced grief with my oldest son. And I just thought back at some of the things that I used to say to like students and parents that were grieving. And I'm like, man, I rethought everything that I used to say, because I'm like, they would say those things to me. And I was like, that wasn't helpful.
Would
Like-
you be willing to tell us so
Well-
that we can all get better? What are some of those things that you wish you would have known? Is that too vulnerable? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, it's just stuff like, God's going to do great things through this. Or like, he's got a plan, or, just trust him. And I'm like, I can't right now. So then now I start thinking about it in that way of like, okay, I need to be like, I remember how it felt when I was going through it and the things that people said that were unhelpful. So I think about, okay, so my conversation now is, man, life sucks. Like, and I want to walk alongside while it sucks with you, because I know like this sucks,
Right.
And like it's okay to be mad right now,
Yeah.
and let's just walk through it together.
Yeah.
Instead of saying like, oh, look for the good things, and like look, oh my gosh, like think about, oh, it's okay, he can't do that, but he's gonna be able to do this. And I'm like, okay, but I don't want to hear that right now.
I love that you said that, because I think it's so easy as the church to say those things. It's actually the easiest thing in that moment.
Well, we
to
just
say.
think about, okay, what are nice churchy things to say
right
to these people.
with all the best intentions.
With all the best
the best
intentions.
intentions. And I think
But I know like none of that, like that doesn't correlate with the conversation.
No,
that
I
we're
think
having.
it's
Literally, we're still
completely
in the
connected to the conversation, because
we're definitely keeping that in.
yeah, because let's also consider John 11 as one of the passages we were wrestling with. Jesus knows that Lazarus is dying or dead, and he doesn't do anything. And we try to hyper spiritualize that, but that's the way most of us feel when something of significant loss happens. I trust you have the power to do something, and you didn't. And the fact that you're saying, I want to walk with you through this. First of all, there's incredible humanity in that.
Yeah.
But it's also part of the reason why I think when Jesus does show up, he weeps. Like, because he gets it. It doesn't mean it all goes away. It still sucks.
Yeah.
But I think if we could all be a little more like Ayubu, that's, what would Ayubu do?
No.
That's the new bracelet. Like, how do I walk with you through the suck? And how do we embrace the suck? That's a huge part of grief, I think.
Noticing the way that people are grieving and meeting them there is so huge. I remember like one of my best friends, like I went through this period when I was grieving and hurting for my oldest son's sickness and everything. I got like obsessed with buying t-shirts because I love t-shirts. People would be like, man, like you're buying so many t-shirts, like you could be doing something else with it. Like, I didn't realize that I was grieving, and that was my, like, getting a package in the mail and like opening it up was like,
It's like your
gave me happiness
comfort
in that
food.
moment. And I was like,
Yeah.
I could forget the grief for a moment. And I remember one of my best friends sent me a shirt, and the note said, I see you and I'm hurting with you. And just now I wanted to share a little love with you. And I just like, man, that was so powerful.
Yeah.
That's
What a
so good.
tangible way for us to be there for our students.
Yeah, and so
motivation,
noticing-
just even sending a note in the mail, like
Yeah.
what that does for a kid,
Yeah.
or text,
Yeah.
That's
so
so
the
good.
T-shirt effect.
It's like meatloaf
Yeah.
and mashed potatoes for me. Comfort food.
But it was just the noticing, like somebody noticed that that was
Yeah.
my grieving, and it was like it took a deep digging for him to realize that. And I think sometimes, like if we dig a little deeper, we'll see the way that students are grieving, and we can meet that.
I love that.
That's so good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Another important topic that we talk about on a yearly basis here, and I'm sure you talk about in your ministry because, hey, as youth workers, we don't have the luxury of ignoring this. But the topic of sex with middle school and high school students looks a little different. And culture's been changing in this space. So let's talk about it.
One thing that I've been in conversations that we've been rethinking is, while it feels valuable to do a series that is specifically on sex, what would it look like to approach this topic, I guess, in a more like general way, like decontextualize, take it off the platform and say, okay, once a year we're gonna elevate this topic, talk about sex for 3 to 4 weeks, and that's all we really talk about. But what does it look like to talk about healthy relationships all year long, so that when you get to the sex talk, it's not like the one time you talk about sex.
So good.
So yeah, that's one thing we've been rethinking, is how can we keep approaching this topic week after week, series after series, and it not feel like you have to put it on a pedestal to talk about it and have to get all the things in this one 3 to
I love that
3 to 5 week message.
So I'm curious, like, have you been, for the series, if you follow our suggested scope and cycle, like the series leading up to it, are you thinking about those conversations in that sex series, and leading up to that?
Yeah,
That's
kind of.
awesome.
Well, we're trying to make it not a big deal, and I know that probably can feel triggering, but we're trying to say, this is something, if you really only focus on it once and try to have every conversation you need to have in such a short window of time, there's no way to cover all the things you need to cover. So why don't we talk about it in an ongoing, forever, never-ending conversation, that it just shows up whenever we talk about relationships or life or anything?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Which would make sense, since we were all created sexual beings. It would make sense that we would make it part of the ongoing conversation. An interesting thing that I've been rethinking, Crystal Chang, Marco Stryker, and I did a sexual ethics workshop at Orange Conference this past year. And one of the interesting pieces of data that I kind of unfolded during the workshop is this idea that when Paul wrote Flee from Sexual Immorality in the first century, most biblical historians believe that puberty was starting among guys and girls around the same time, around 11 or 12 years old. Most girls got married at 13. Most guys got married at 17. So when you're talking about fleeing from sexual immorality, you're talking about starting puberty at this point, and it's a very short period before you're married. Well, you fast forward to 1960, puberty has declined a little bit on both male and female, but they're getting married around early 20s. Fast forward to 2000, they're getting married mid-20s. Today, the average age of marriage is 32, and for the first time in a long time, there's a marked decline in puberty. So puberty is starting, especially in females, younger. And he's talking about fleeing from sexual immorality. We're not at all implying that we shouldn't flee from sexual immorality, but we need to understand that it's gone from being a sprint to a marathon within the context of how we've approached it in faith communities. That changes the way I think we communicate about it, because it's not nearly as easy as we make it out to be, especially considering there's more female agency. We're talking about a porn-saturated culture, social media, which means they have access to so much imagery, and they're in a post-Christian culture.
And the stats of people who are choosing not to ever get married
Correct.
are growing.
Yeah. No doubt about it. And then this is the kicker, and I'll be quiet. If you actually get honest about the data on how many Christians are abstaining from premarital sex before marriage, our strategy isn't working. It wasn't working in the 60s, it wasn't working in 2000, and it isn't working now. Anywhere from 75 to 90% of people admit, I had sex before marriage. So again, we have to rethink how we're talking about sexuality, because our strategies have not been working, and the data proves it.
Yeah. A couple things I'm thinking too. I feel like a lot of times, so my undergrad degree is in school health education, and a lot of times when we would talk about abstinence education in school systems across this country, one of the things we talked about often was the reason people will say, wait till marriage until you have sex, is because it's a concrete event. And when you're speaking to concrete thinkers, if you say something like, wait until you are ready, that's not a concrete thing. Wait until it's the right person, not a concrete thing. So that was one of the things we talked a lot about in our human sexuality classes, was part of the reason that language exists is because it's concrete, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
And I'm wondering, like, is there a different way to concretely talk about that that honors some of that? I was also thinking less about what you were saying. I love the idea of just continued conversation about healthy relationship. My pushback to some of that would be, at least in the middle school space, a lot of times you have to have parent permission to talk to the kids about sex and relationships. And so although it should be an ongoing conversation and not this isolated series, when you're talking about honoring parents and partnering with parents,
For sure.
that is hard in the middle school space or the junior high
Yeah.
space. And obviously very hard when you have a combined environment. Possible, yes. It just requires a lot more prep and a lot more communication.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question as our resident middle school
Yeah.
expert? Should youth leaders default to asking parents permission versus let me gauge this? Should the automatic default be we need to make sure we have permission?
I feel like it just really depends on your community.
Okay.
I also think it depends on what your school systems do, because some public school systems in middle school, in the health education classes, require parent permission slips to be in the classroom during that unit. And so for me, I'm like, I would find out what does the school do, because that's the standard that's been set for, especially for that group of parents who really cares. And what they really care about is, we just want to know what you're saying.
Right.
We don't know how to talk to our kid about it. And most often they're thinking, my kid isn't ready for that conversation. And some of them aren't, to be honest. But a lot of them are. Most of them are. It's just that the parent and the student haven't had that conversation yet. So there's a gap there. And so we have this amazing opportunity to partner with parents in the middle school phase when it comes to this conversation. And through like talking about what we're going to talk about helps equip them to continue that conversation, because they're the number one source of information for their kid anyways.
Well, and how often are we creating a safe space for people that maybe are feeling attacked during those conversations?
Yep.
Like, do we allow a place for them to go with help in that space for them? You know, maybe they're feeling super attacked when we do those series. So either they don't come because they know it's coming up and they're like, it's not a safe space. And so they avoid it, and we're missing opportunities. And so what if we created a safe space in our environment that they could go to with like a professional help that can walk them through, or like, you know, just allow them an opportunity to just step away for a moment, you know, in those moments. I don't know if that's
No. That's a great point.
I was just thinking about just even like just the rise in stats on sexual abuse and sexual trauma. Like that matters in this conversation, and that might be a reason they don't want to come.
Yeah. And what if that person avoided it and we could have had a space for them to heal?
I think that's part of the reason we don't really talk as much about sex as much as we talk about sexual integrity. And I think part of that integrity part is hoping to create safe space. Like we talk about boundaries, we talk about confession, we talk about, like, there's all these, and that's the ongoing conversations that when you say you're having a sex talk, everyone's thinking this is the talk. Like, no, you need to have the talk with a trusted adult. No one on a stage should be giving you the talk, right? But hopefully the conversations around the idea of sexual integrity are what create the safe space to have a conversation about what does it mean to honor other people in every way, not just when it comes to intimate moments,
That's
but
so
like
good.
in every way. What does it mean to be fully known by someone? Before you get to in the bedroom, we are talking about how do you honor them with integrity all the way through every interaction with humans. And that's part of the ongoing
Love that.
conversation. That's part of the creating safe space. That's part of, you're not coming to church for 4 weeks to hear the talk. We're not doing that. That's just awkward, right? And it's also not a list of do's and don'ts, to be honest. You know, I think, hot take, I think some people would prefer that it is a list of do's and don'ts, because that's a very clear thing, you know, to talk about. But we leave that up to each community to define about, you know, what does your church believe about these things? Please go ahead, and if you have do's and don'ts, add those. Do what you have to do to talk to your people. But from the stage and from how we want to set up these conversations, we're going to say sexual integrity is the foundation, and then everything else can be built on that.
Can I slide something across the table in regard to that? And I would love for you guys to respond to this. We are leading in a post-Christian context, which means the scriptures have not been and are very likely not going to be the context for a teenager's worldview. How do you properly appropriate the scriptures and sexual integrity wisely as a youth leader? talk amongst yourselves.
I would
Grenade!
I feel like the scriptures are inviting us to sexual integrity, though. I think at least the ones that we would lean on for saying, okay, at this age, whatever stage of life you're in, and you're thinking about what kind of person you want to be, you're thinking about how you want to be treated. I think there's so much in Jesus's teaching that are the foundation for that.
One of the other things that we have the honor and privilege of talking about is the topic of justice, because we serve a God of justice. And there are many, many conversations happening around this topic. So I'd love to hear some of the things that you've been talking about when it comes to talking to middle and high schoolers about justice.
I would think that humans have an innate radar for justice, and they can tell when you're skirting around an issue of justice to not talk about what they're actually seeing and experiencing. And yes, it can be influenced by your background and the voice, the echo chambers you may exist in that you may be more hesitant to see or name. But I just want to believe that as humans who have empathy with other humans, deep down, right? We are convicted when we see things that are unfair or unjust, so that's the first place my mind goes, is that kids and teenagers, they know at a core level in a way that sometimes we try to skirt around or smooth over. So
I think that connects to the way of Jesus. Like when you think about who Jesus was and is, it was about radical generosity. It was about, we are not being theologically honest if we don't understand that so much of the way of Jesus is righting wrongs, how we treat people with less than or the poor. That's not a political ideology. That is the way of Jesus. And so how does my life as a teenager connect to the way of Jesus, and I become someone who's a person that holds justice and as a high standard in my life? I want to be radically generous.
Right.
I want our children to be radically generous. And I feel like a responsibility I have as an adult is to set that example. In the way that I talk, in the way that I see people, in the way that I sit with people, the way that I listen. All of those things I think are acts of justice in some regard.
So I recently, the youth ministry cohort that we put on, we had an opportunity to go down to Georgia Tech, and they have one of the 28th in the world, it's a living building. So it's called the Candida building. And so it's a self-sustaining building. Like everything in it has to have a reason for like the environment and basically reproducing energy, water, all of that like all of it has to be. And it was amazing. But what the biggest thing I took away from, and all of us took away from that opportunity, was our tour guide, Renee. And she was young, just ready to change the world. And it was really, I think so many times when we talk about justice, we talk about it and then we don't give students the opportunity. And like, so the faith community that she was involved in, so she writes the centers and all that, but like they had an opportunity, her faith community had an opportunity to build a new building. And so she went to them and said, hey, I would love an opportunity, a chair in this room. And they were like, absolutely.
So her church is building a new building.
And they were like, yeah, come into this. And so she's like, I work for the Candida building. I do a tour. And she's like, we need to do this when we think about building this new building, we got to do this. And so they were like, absolutely. So
I love that they made room for her.
Yeah,
at the
and
table.
made room. And so she's on the planning committee, and like their goal is like, okay, so can we be a part of that? Like, we want to be a statistic in that. And so they were like thinking, okay, can we be the 29th, 30? Like, so they're like, where can we do that? And so what an amazing thing that they're not too young. Like, let's get them. Like, so if we have an opportunity in our church, like, let's get them at the table. Let's get them in the conversation and let them like have an opportunity to live that and to be a part of it and see like literally see justice that they're a part of.
And I love that it's a different idea many times of justice.
Yep, I was going to say the same thing. I just love the idea of a church who is willing to listen to a kid's passion, what keeps them up at night, and help it intersect with their faith.
Mm-hmm.
Because isn't that the kind of faith we want to pursue anyways?
Right.
If it's going to be part of our everyday?
And I think it's worth saying that the conversation of justice is different in different communities. And obviously it all of it needs to be centered in Jesus, right? But just knowing that, contextualizing to the community that you're speaking to on this topic, especially in light of anything that's happening in current events at the time that you might do the series or have a conversation on justice, anything that's happened in that ministry's history, right, that has maybe been unaddressed. Like there's just so much context that needs to go into before like even standing up, even if we talk about the environment, and talk about any of the sub layers of justice, just knowing your community and knowing what it's obvious when you skirt around certain things. And so I guess I just want to offer that.
I think that's the most important thing when talking about this topic, or if you use our curriculum, that would be the most important thing, is don't forget to build time into your calendar to contextualize this, because more than anything, that definitely needs to happen in this culture. Okay, last but not least, most importantly, Easter.
Easter.
What kinds of things are you talking about? What does that conversation look like?
I love the fact we've addressed a little bit of post-Christian generation. How do we speak to a post-Christian generation? I think it's one of the gifts that this generation has given faith communities, because we get to, in some regard, rebuild their faith around the foundation of our faith, and all of the excess stuff that has happened over centuries can be stripped away, and we can get to the foundation of our faith, and that is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. That we can talk about that. We can help students understand the significance of that event, how it plays in their life. And they're doing it in some ways free of things we brought into the conversation.
Oh, that's good.
When we were, testing the waters as it relates to following in the way.
I want to dig a little bit into, when you say things that we brought into the conversation, could you name like one or two of what you're referring to?
Well, one of the things that I find interesting is that the farther away that we get from the actual event of the resurrection, there are things that have been built into religion and built into church that aren't nearly as connected
Things like what?
to
Call
the
us
resurrection.
out. What are we doing?
Well, I'm not here to call people out.
Call us up. Call us up. That's new language.
I think
learned,
religion,
honestly.
period, is a part of that. Church attendance can be part of that.
Gotcha. Like just having the wrong metrics around what it means to follow Jesus.
Yes,
Gotcha.
and what I'm trusting in, I just think it's important that we're not calling kids to ists and isms. We're calling teenagers to follow a real man named Jesus who lived, a real man named Jesus who died, and a real man named Jesus who rose from the dead, who proved himself to be God because he did that. And everything else has been our attempt to try to figure it out. That's the foundation, though. Does that make sense?
Totally. I think one thing that we're talking about when it comes to Easter is making sure that as we talk about Easter, specifically in the curriculum, I think it's a 3-week series, but we're talking about making sure that it's good news to all people. And so when you look at Jesus, what sounds like good news to one person doesn't necessarily sound like good news to another person. And so once we lay that foundation, like all of this is built on love. And when we look at how Jesus loved people specifically for who they were, for where they were, we had this awkward phrase that we're like, clearly we can't write this, but Jesus spoke each person's love language. You know what I mean? Like we're not going to write that in the curriculum, but how do we get to that idea that Jesus was individual with people? And that's why they believed in him. Like when he was gone for 3 days and your world is in chaos, you can recall moments that he loved you in the way you needed to be loved. And that's why I'm going to continue to choose to follow him. And so I'm looking forward to that part of the way we're approaching Easter this year. So
That makes me want to cry.
I know. That's so good.
Yeah.
That is so good. The people who were closest to the resurrection weren't 1,000% sure of everything that it meant, except that Jesus loved us. And he spent intimate time with us. And it should bother us, I think, somewhat, that the farther we're 2,000 and something years away from the resurrection, and think about how certain we are of things. I mean, in fact, so much of our divisions are because we are so stinking certain about things that the people closest to Jesus weren't certain
That's
about.
so true.
All they were sure of is he loved me. He spent time. I wasn't someone he was supposed to spend time with, and he spent time with me.
Yeah.
I wasn't someone he
You better
was.
preach.
I wasn't someone that should have had a seat at the table. I mean, Leslie, Ashley,
Yeah.
I was a woman and people ridiculed women, but Jesus spent time with me, which gives even more credence to the fact that first two people who were at the tomb that day were women.
Tell them.
Yep.
I'm trying to tell the people.
Yeah.
But we get so far removed that there is something fundamentally wrong with us being farther away from the actual event and more certain.
That's real.
The people who were the closest to it were the less certain. They were the least certain, except for one thing. He loved me.
If you can't tell, we're pretty passionate about all of these topics. And we could probably talk for hours. But thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to hear what these conversations look like in your ministry. If you have any questions or you have anything that you're rethinking in this space, we would love, love, love to rethink it with you. Until next time, we'll see you soon.